Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We will be covering the number one seed race coming down to the wire in the NFC with the Minnesota Vikings taking on the Detroit Lions. We'll talk about Jimmy Butler's 7-game suspension from the Miami Heat. We'll also talk about the final wildcard spot in the AFC race between the Broncos, Miami Dolphins, and Cincinnati to secure that final position. We'll also talk about the race for the NFC South winner there, and then the AFC North as well. Both divisions coming down to the wire. And please stick around for the end of the show. I'll be giving you my reaction to more comments coming from Mohamed Salah regarding his contract situation, his frustrations, and how important it is for Liverpool to re-sign Mohamed Salah. We'll have a conversation. Before we start off, if you have a question during the show, we want to hear your input. Is a big part of what makes the show successful, and we thrive on your energies and insights. Whether it's a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion you just have to share, please don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. And if you want to make absolutely sure your message stands out, gets featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that. Just use the super chat button at the bottom of the chat box. Send in your super chat. This guarantees that the super chat gets read on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We really rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content you love, and we appreciate every bit of it. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit that super chat button. Let's keep this show as interactive and exciting as possible. And if you prefer, you can always go to the gsmcpodcast.net to tip, donate, or leave a comment or question there. Again, we couldn't do what we do without your amazing support, and we're so thankful to have you as part of our community. Before we do start off in the first segment, I want to announce this is my last show on the GSMC Sports Network. It was a great experience going from hosting, first of all, the GSMC Soccer Podcast to now hosting the Dead Ball Sports Podcast that I've hosted for the last month or so. It's an experience. I've enjoyed it. I've worked with some great people. I have great bosses, and everything about this has been absolutely great. I want to thank GSMC for the opportunity that they gave me to advance my career going forward. They've really been a great stepping stone for me, not just as a someone trying to break it into this business, but just in terms of me as a human. They've taught me professionalism. I really got to see the true meaning of good souls. There's a lot of good people in the organization. Everybody there is pure. So I just want to say I really enjoyed my time at GSMC, and I'm overall extremely grateful for the opportunity, I have to say. That being said, we still have a show we gotta do, and we do have to start off with that number one seed race coming down to the wire in the NFC. Obviously, this is a game that everyone is anticipating. They have those always the last week of the season, the week 7 or week 18 now, final game. You always have that that one game flexed into Sunday night, the biggest game of the week. This time it's the one that decides the number one seed. Minnesota Vikings going on the road to take on their division rivals, the Detroit Lions. Both teams sitting at 14-2. This is actually a game between two teams that have had the most wins in NFL history. No regular season game has happened with two teams combined for 28 wins. Now, some of that has to do with the extra game. Obviously, that's a big factor. But two 14-win teams is ridiculous. Two teams 14-2. And one of these teams are gonna have 14 wins and be the 5 seed. That's the cutthroat, ruthless nature of the NFL. And they both have really, really strong seasons. Detroit, they actually beat Minnesota earlier on this season. In Minnesota, it was a very, very impressive win from Detroit. How they were able to sustain success on that Vikings defense. I thought the Lions offense, what they were able to do in that game was very impressive. How they generated production, I was really, really impressed. from the Lions, especially their run game. Gibbs had it going in that game. He had 15 carries, 116 yards, 2 touchdowns. He popped the long run in there as well, a 45-yard run. Goff, too, played a methodical game. Was 22 of 25, 280, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. I thought overall Detroit, they blitzed them in that second quarter. Minnesota went up 10-0, but Detroit blitzed them in that second quarter. Went on a 21-point spree in that second quarter. Held it down defensively in that quarter as well, and it opened up a pathway for Detroit to win that game. It got interesting later in the fourth quarter with a defensive play, defensive turnover for Minnesota that got them back into the game. But at the end of the day, Detroit was able to pull that out. And this time around, that game was in Minnesota. This time around, is in Detroit. Now, this Detroit team is a little bit different from that Detroit team in the fact that they suffered a lot of injuries defensively, and defensively they've been pretty vulnerable over the last couple of weeks. And yes, this team is still an unbelievable team. Still unbelievable what they've done. They're very, very impressive. But, I can see them struggling to contain how Sam Darnold has been playing this season. I can see them struggling to contain that Minnesota Vikings offense, controlling Aaron Jones. They can, I can see Minnesota have a good day offensively. But it really comes down to Detroit, their offense carrying the slack for the defense. Can they replicate what they did earlier on this season when they took on Minnesota? Can they replicate that again going up against this Vikings defense? Brian Flores has this Vikings defense playing as one of the most elite units in football. They're not afraid to bring pressure in key moments. They got a secondary that they have enough talent there that they can go man to man. And overall, they're just ferocious defensively. They're a ferocious unit, and it's hard to have consistent production throughout 4 quarters against them. So that's something I'm gonna be interested how this Lions offense fares up against them, going at them for a second time in a row. To do what Detroit did in the first time around, to do that twice in one season against this defense is a very, very difficult task. As far as Minnesota, Sam Darnold, man, he's been absolutely balling. He's a borderline MVP candidate. He's been absolutely sensational. This Minnesota team, this Minnesota team had a really, really strong start to the season. They were blowing out teams left and right early on. Minnesota was. And I was a little queasy about them. They destroyed the Giants. They destroyed the Vikings. They went up big on the Packers. It ended up being a 2-point game, but they were up big early. I'm talking about the first time around. So I was a little queasy about them because, Minnesota had the team a few years ago where they went like 13-4 in the regular season. They got knocked out by the Giants. So I was a little reluctant to believe in them. And then when they went on to lose those 2 straight games to the Detroit Lions and the Los Angeles Rams, I forgot about them, honestly. When I was thinking of the top teams in the NFC, I completely wrote them off. Like, I didn't think they had any sort of chance to really be a contender for this number 1 seed, to be a team that actually, and back then, that's when I was worried. I still believe my Niners were going to get in. I didn't know the Niners would fall apart. So when I was assessing my teams in the NFC of teams that I worry about the most, the Minnesota Vikings, after those 2 straight losses, I had them checked out because, I know what Minnesota has been in the past, and I never quite believed. But slowly, and it's taken a while. I ended up, it happened basically recently. I'm saying, okay, hold on, this Minnesota team. And I think that the difference maker for me was that win against the Packers, when I was really starting to get sold. Even when they beat Seattle and Chicago and Atlanta and Arizona and Chicago, all that, I was still queasy about them. Tennessee, I was still queasy about them still. It's that win against Green Bay, that second win against Green Bay this past Sunday where, it was 27-25, but that game wasn't even close. I'm talking, Minnesota, they outplayed them front to bottom. You know, it was a garbage time score at the end that made that one possession game. But they just outplayed that Green Bay Packer team, a legit Green Bay Packer team. I tell you as well, they're 11-5. They're 11-5, and they'll be in the playoffs as well. So that's when I started believing, okay, this Minnesota team, maybe there's something there, and a 14-2 record is not something to be messed with. Now, the unfortunate thing about the NFL, it's a cutthroat business, and when both teams are 14-2, and one team is gonna be the 5 seed and the other is a 1 seed based on one game, it's just like, wow, that's rough. That really is rough. And it's gonna be a good one. I think it's gonna come down to a while. For me, just based on what I've seen throughout the duration of the season, it's tough. It's tough to believe that Detroit is just not gonna be that 1 seed. I mean, I know they've been slipping up recently, not results, but I'm talking strictly injuries and defensive performance. Yeah, but I just can't see Detroit drop to the 5 seed. I just don't see it. I don't see it. I think they just pull away, and I feel like Dan Campbell and this Detroit Lions team is gonna do what they have to do. Whether it's defensively, they gotta force turnovers, or Dan Campbell needs to steal an extra possession here and there by, faking a punt or something of that sort. Not saying you fake an onside kick like the way he did it against Buffalo Bills. Well, it wasn't even a fake. They just went for an onside kick at the top of the fourth quarter. I'm not saying that. That's just ridiculous. But I feel like they'll be able to steal a possession here and there through, something special teams, a fake, force maybe a couple turnovers out of Sam Darnold, something that Detroit can get extra possessions to get more offense going, because they're going to have to outscore Minnesota. I think Minnesota is going to have their way against this Detroit Lions defense. I think they'll struggle to contain Sam Darnold and Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. I think they'll struggle. And all the onus that they put on Justin Jefferson, I think is going to give pathways for other players to take advantage of, such as Jordan Addison. So I worry about the Detroit Lions defense. But as far as their offense, I think Detroit Lions offense is really one of the strong. I think in this game we get two of some of the strongest units in football going up against each other. The Detroit Lions offense and that Minnesota Vikings defense. Two hellaciously strong units in my opinion. Two consistent units throughout the duration of the season. Two well-coached units as well. I think both coordinators are, future head coaching candidates. Future head coach Brian Flores has already been a head coach. The only thing that's stopping him from being a head coach again is all the shenanigans, regarding, that's that's gonna be the decider over here. The strength going up the strength. Which strength rises up? I'm gonna go with Detroit just from the whole basis. I can't see Detroit drop to the 5 seed. And it's unfortunate to be 14-3 and to drop to the 5 seed. It really is. And I wouldn't change it, obviously. I love how the NFL has divisions and the importance of winning division games. And how you win the division, you're rewarded with the home wildcard game and all that. I have no problem with that. But at the same time, it is ruthless. It is cutthroat. A 14-3 team being a 5 seed, having to play, most likely the entire playoffs on the road. It's so unfortunate, but it's how the NFL works. And I obviously I think this is going to be a really, really tight game. I'm not, I think it's a pick-em. I think Detroit being at home with the culmination of I just can't see them drop the 5 seed. So yeah, I'm gonna favor Detroit Lions in this one. I'm gonna choose them, but overall, I mean, it's a game I'm looking forward to for sure.